Vinyl community, it's Jason. Saturday night, I wanted to do a video contest entry. This is for Dylan's channel, Noble Records. 750, which is incredible. Congratulations. I love Dylan's channel. One of the things that really stands out for me is someone who, I like to go and buy collections from people, just, dig out of their attics or behind their refrigerators or whatever, and a lot of people do, and Dylan does it on a scale that's just on steroids. But it's someone who does that, and when I just love hearing the stories about he met this guy 2 years ago and he couldn't remember his address and was driving the neighborhood and just happened to remember the house he was at, and just crazy stories about finding records. And I can, I remember where I bought all my, I pull a record and it's not just the music, but it's like you remember where you got it, why you bought it, like, where you were in your life. So it's one of the reasons why this contest is so fitting. It fits his channel so well. The way he describes more than just the music, how he got there and where he found it, and so I want to contribute, participate. This was a tough one. I kind of show this, show that, show your top 5, whatever. It's a little easier for some reason to come up with a list of records, but this one was tough. There's so many possibilities. Everyone has so many possibilities. It's all about, talking about things that impacted your life, basically. It's kind of most of these questions, and everyone has so many answers. So I had to really think about it, and so I had to have a cheat sheet. So the first question was, what is your first memory with vinyl? So my dad had records, but I don't really remember him ever playing them. I was born in '80, so records were, by the time I was, old enough to really understand music and pay attention to music, I was 7 or 8, or by that time, people weren't really buying records anymore. So for me, the first time was when I was a little older. I was in college, and I was aware of records. My dad had a record collection. I'd seen his record collection. I really liked music. Music was a huge part of my life at that time, and I was super into punk music. Me and my best friend, who I just met when I was a freshman, into the same music, punk music. Then we went to classic rock, and then hip hop, and our taste just evolved. But the first memory of vinyl was with him, and it was when we were about to be seniors that summer year. The summer before, and I remember his parents going out of town for a couple months because he's from England, so they went back to England for 2 months maybe, and he had a friend from church who was maybe 15 years old enough, so maybe he was 36, and he used to be a DJ, and so he gave my friend his turntables, and his record collection was maybe 150 records, so he had a ton of 80s hip-hop and whatever, Michael Jackson, whatever was popular at the time. So that was kind of my first memory of vinyl from that collection. After that, I started buying records for him, and so that was kind of the seed of my vinyl recognition. When I'm starting to observe that, hey, maybe I should look for records. So the first one, this is Beastie Boys. So of that collection, he had the 150, whatever he gave us. The stuff I really remember is Run DMC and Beastie Boys. So I want to show this because this album is incredible. The first Beastie Boys album. We played this a lot that summer for sure. Heavy rotation, and I grew up with these guys. So at the time I was that was 2000-ish, 2001. So these guys this is from 80s. So this was huge for a long time. I grew up with this, but just to revisit it with that collection, and the first time kind of starting to thinking about collecting vinyl, I guess, not for myself personally, but for my friend, because I would go to thrift stores and buy stuff. So this is my first memory of vinyl. Great album to start. So my next one, it was, this is, the second question was, what is the first album you fell in love with? So, this isn't the exact album. First album I ever fell in love with was 40 Ounces of Freedom, but I don't have it on vinyl. But Sublime in general, because I grew up in Southern California, like 30 minutes from Long Beach, where these guys, grew up and were playing, and so these guys were huge where I grew up. And as a 16-year-old in high school, my best friend lived like 3 houses down. His sister was a cheerleader. She was like 2 years older, and I remember she was like in the cool group, and she played this at her house. 40 Ounces of Freedom. And it just blew my mind. That was when I started discovering music that really wasn't, because Sublime wasn't really played on the radio very much. They had Date Rape, so that did play on the radio, but I don't know, they were still sort of really underground. And I remember she had the album, the first CD where they had before they started pulling some of the tracks for infringements on copyrights or whatever, for song usage. So, I was there, from the very beginning, and it just, from listening to what I was listening to before, which was like Velvet DeVoe and whatever was popular in the mid-'80s late, 80s, 90s, to listening to Sublime. Sublime really just blew my mind when I was 16 years old. So 40 Ounces of Freedom had a huge impact, and it kind of set me on a direction to start looking for different music that really wasn't being played everywhere and really well known everywhere. So I want to show this record since I don't have 40 Ounces. And the reason I don't have 40 Ounces is I really want a copy with Get Out before they cut it. Because they cut it. I believe they sample Zeppelin Lemon Song in that, which they weren't allowed to use, so they had to pull it from the album. There was talks of them pressing it with it, so I'm still holding out, hopefully get that. But in general, then this album came out when I was still in high school as well. He died, and then I heard about him dying, and then all of a sudden his album came out, and they just blew up. So these guys in general were just, for me, like game changers. And so the 40 Ounces really was a huge album in my life. So the third question is, what album did you spend the most money on? So that is actually the album we're listening to. This is a Brazilian album, a Brazilian artist, Som Imaginario. So I don't have it in here because it's playing. It's on Odeon. So this is, so I bought this on eBay, and this is the most I ever spent on a record, and I paid $200 for this, and most I ever usually spend is about $100, and that's only been a handful of times. But these guys are pretty obscure in Brazil. They're not in Brazil. They're not obscure, but they're just not very well known. They're kind of like Pink Floyd-ish status. Like everyone knows Pink Floyd here, but not a lot of people listen to it, I guess. I don't know. I didn't grow up at that time, but that's how I'm trying to compare it. So this is their second album, and this is the original press, and I really love this album. Out of 3, they have 3 albums. They're all incredible. The first and second are just insane, but the second one is my favorite. So I bought the original press, and it's like a sandwich cover. They call it a sandwich cover in Brazil. So it comes. We very rarely see it with still with like the original plastic sleeve on it. So this thing's like super minty. So I paid $200 for it. It definitely is worth more than that, but I had to. $200 is a lot, but I've actually bid for more than that on record just because of the in value to what you're paying. But this was this is the most I ever paid. But I'm so happy, and this is what we're listening to now. So these guys kind of remind me, if you're familiar with Os Mutantes, they kind of sound like Os Mutantes to me, but a little darker and more serious. Os Mutantes is dark too, but they're a little more playful. So they kind of a little more farther in the psych spectrum than Os Mutantes, but really love these guys. And the main dude on here is Wagner Tiso. I think he's the kind of the leader. I'm pretty sure, but he plays piano. He's pretty legit. So yeah, that's the most I ever paid. It was I you know, I didn't regret it too much. Sometimes you spend too much for a record and you're like, why did I do that? But I don't know. I guess I felt like it was a good deal, and this album's really hard to find. You don't see it very much. And it's in amazing condition, so can't pass it up. So the fourth question is, what album has great significance, impact to you? So this is obviously a tough one. So many ways you can go with that. But since I am currently, and I'm displaying, I'm showing a lot of Brazilian records, and that's kind of what's relevant currently for me. I try to collect Brazilian records. My wife is Brazilian. I love the music. So I've had a lot of pivotal kind of albums in my life, but since this is more relevant, I'm gonna go with this. This is Jorge Ben, Africa, Brazil. So, you know, I was always a huge into music, and that's what me and my wife had in common, which is part of the reason why we fit so well together when we met. But when I went to Brazil, I heard the music, and it was insane, and it was so good, you know. But first time somewhere, and you're just kind of slowly taking it in. So I didn't really, it took a while to, I guess, appreciate it. But when I first heard this album, I think this album is perfection. Like 10 out of 10, every song. Like, if you're in a bad mood, you put this on at the end, you're so happy. And because every song is a sing-along, at least for me. I don't even know really the right words. I'm just kind of mumbling the melodies. But for me, when I heard this, and I was like, oh shit, like Brazilian music. And then I started, you know, researching his catalog, and which led me to people he played with, to, you know, which led me to Os Mutantes, Gilberto Gil, and Caetano Veloso, and I just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So this is kind of like the seed of my curiosity in Brazilian music. So this is a huge impact on my life, at least relevantly. So yeah, it's the fourth one. So the last question is, what's the ultimate Grail record? And this is another reason why the concept is so hard. Is just so many possibilities. You have to pick one. At least you get top 5. You can, like, but the one, you got to really think about it. So I mean, everyone has tons of Grails, tons of records they want on their want list. I mean, I have a bunch stuff that's expensive. I just put it on there just so I don't forget forever. In some weird situation, I can remember that I want it. But the one for me that I guess is the biggest Grail out of all the Grails is Luis Essa and Sagrada Familia. So these are a bunch of Brazilian artists. This is Luis Essa, and this is the repress, obviously not the Grail. So that's why I say it's the Grail. But this was pressed on Lazarus. This is just a repress they did a couple years ago. Actually, when I bought it on eBay, the guy said he got the rights from one of the trumpet players, who is, I think it's Bill Vogel, who is he's American. So he was one of the American. I think there was maybe 2 Americans, for sure one. He was played on this, and so he actually gave the rights to at least pressing this in the U.S. because they repressed in Spain, U.S., and then obviously. So the original was in Mexico, and so there's a bunch of Brazilian artists. Luis Essa, who was huge he had a pretty big jazz band in the 60s. I think it was Timbo Trio, and then you had Joycey, who was like a huge, like folk psych kind of singer, and you know Nelson Angelo, who was from Club Esquina, who was an incredible guitar player, like up there with like John McLaughlin and Joe Pass. And then you had Nana Vasconcelos, who did a lot of the percussion, like Berimbau, and you know he's well known for playing percussion. So this album is incredible. They do a lot of covers, a couple originals, mostly covers, but it's the reason why it's a Grail is because they never sold it commercially. So they're Brazilian artists. They recorded in Mexico. They pressed in Mexico and just gave out copies to like friends and family, and so they never sold it. So it's only sold a couple times, and there's been one on sale that's been just astronomical, so no one ever bought it. But to get this it's just you know, a story in itself, because it's just so hard to find, because no one ever really bought it. It was somebody's friend gave it to them or whatever. So somehow they obtained it, and to obtain that from them, and would be incredible. So that's why it makes it a grail, because I don't know, it's going to be really hard to track down. So Licença and Sagrada Familia, Onda Nova do Brasil. You can buy the repress. Or at least, I believe it's on YouTube as well, so you can check it out. But for me, yeah, that's my grail. So there's my 5 questions, my answers to the questions. Appreciate your channel, everything you do. Love looking at those rare records that you pull in, and it inspires me to go out and try to dig more myself. So I appreciate that, and congratulations.